Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Seek Wanderer. I'm Isla. Today's topic is how we see the world, the formation and the resonance of aesthetic experience. Part 1. How seeing gives rise to aesthetic experience. We do not simply look at the world in every act of seeing. The world also unfolds before us in a particular way. Let's dive in.
We look at the world every day, yet rarely pause to ask, is the world we see truly the same world? The same tree, the same mist, the same face may take on different appearances in different eyes. Some see use, some see knowledge, some see beauty. What, then, shapes the way we look, and in turn, the world that appears before us? On beauty, Guang Qianzhu writes of the different attitudes one may bring to the sight of a pine tree. Faced with the same pine, the merchant sees the value and use of timber, what it can do. The botanist sees classification, structure, and the laws of growth, what it is, while the painter sees form, inner rhythm, and visual beauty, how it presents itself to us. The pine itself has not changed. What has changed is the relation the viewer forms with it. It follows that whether something appears beautiful is not determined by the object alone. It also depends on the eye with which the viewer approaches it, and on the meaning given to it in the act of looking. What we see is not reality in its untouched form, but reality refracted through our experience, emotion, knowledge, and sensibility. When we encounter an object, seeing does not begin from nothing. Form is caught by the eye, experience is set in motion, emotion and memory enter as well. To see is not merely a visual act. It already involves recognition, association, and understanding. This process, in which seeing and understanding occur together, may be called visual perception. For instance, when we look at an old building, the eye first notices the texture of the wall, the shifting of light and shadow, and the outline of its structure. Experience allows us to recognize that it may belong to a particular period, a certain style, or a fragment of urban history. Emotion and memory may then carry us back to a particular moment. An old street, a passing encounter, or a life once familiar and now distant. The building is no longer merely a spatial object. Through the interweaving of form, memory, and feeling, it gradually becomes an aesthetic object. In Art and Illusion, E.H. Gombrich reminds us that seeing is not a mechanical copy of reality. We are not like cameras, recording the world exactly as it is. Rather, we always see through the experience, schemata, and expectations we already carry with us. In other words, what we see is not reality in its simple, original form, but a world already processed by perception. If visual perception explains how seeing takes place, horizon explains where our seeing begins. Horizon is not only the range of what the eye can see. It also includes one's upbringing, intellectual formation, cultural background, and everyday experience. Like an invisible background, it shapes what we notice, what we overlook, and where we are able to find meaning. On photography, Susan Sontag speaks of the heroism of vision. reminding us that seeing is not always a quiet reception of the object. It may also carry a desire to select, capture, and interpret the world. Thus, when the same object is situated within different horizons, the focus of attention and the experience of looking both change accordingly. Some see material, some see the symbolic. Some are moved by feeling, others are touched by history. The first step in the emergence of aesthetic feeling is not that the world simply presents itself before us, but that our perception, experience, and expectation are already at work, allowing the object to unfold before us in a particular way. In Chapter 1, we discussed how seeing does not begin from nothing. Yet to enter aesthetic experience is not merely to see an object, but to form a certain responsive relation with it. When the object is no longer something to be possessed, consumed, or used for diversion, but appears before us as a presence that can be contemplated, felt, and understood, an aesthetic attitude begins to emerge. In On Beauty, Guang Qianzhu uses the example of sea mist to discuss aesthetic distance. The same sea mist may take on different meanings in different eyes. Someone gazing from the far shore may see it as a natural wonder, hazy, vast, mysterious, even touched with poetry. Yet for the sailor caught within the mist, what is felt may not be beauty, but danger, anxiety, and distress. The sea mist itself has not changed. What has changed is the relation between the person and the mist. This is what On Beauty describes as aesthetic distance. Aesthetic distance may be spatial and temporal, or it may be psychological. When we are too closely pressed against reality, the object first comes to the fore as a problem, a danger, or a task. Only when a proper interval is formed can the object, for a moment, be released from direct practical concern and enter aesthetic experience. Aesthetic experience often occurs in this intermediate state, holding a distance, yet being drawn in. It is also in this state that empathy begins to take shape. The appearance of the aesthetic object awakens human feeling, while human feeling, memory, and imagination, in turn alter the way the object appears within us. Empathy is precisely this process of mutual evocation and response. Thus, the same literary figure may signify solitude to some and resistance to others. Some see repression in his silence. Others see dignity in his struggle. The figure itself has not changed. What has changed is the emotional connection formed between the viewer and the figure. Psychoanalytic discussions of projection and identification can also provide a point of reference for aesthetic resonance. When we encounter a work, we often project our own emotions, desires, or lived experience onto the object, and through that object come to understand ourselves anew. For example, when reading a character, we enter into his situation and feel the weight of his fate. We may also recognize, in his solitude, silence, or struggle, a certain passage of our own life. This does not mean that the work is merely a subjective projection. Rather, it means that profound aesthetic experience often arises at the moment, when the work and one's personal life experience illuminate one another. From the perspective of aesthetic psychology, aesthetic experience is not an isolated instant, but a process that unfolds through attention, expectation, perception, feeling, imagination, and understanding. In certain aesthetic moments, self-consciousness temporarily recedes, while perception becomes unusually concentrated. The viewer seems briefly withdrawn from ordinary reality, entering a state of almost complete self-forgetfulness. It is in such a state that an object is not merely seen, but truly experienced. Aesthetic experience does not come to an abrupt end. When the act of looking is over, it continues to resonate afterwards in memory, judgment, and renewed seeing, gradually changing the way we understand the world. In the previous 2 chapters, we discussed how seeing begins and how aesthetic experience comes into being. Yet beyond this lies a more fundamental question. Who is looking? Who is being looked at? Aesthetic looking may appear to belong to personal feeling, but it is never merely a relation between the senses and the object. It also involves the viewer's bodily experience, social position, and the ways in which an age, together with its structures of power, organizes looking. In Ways of Seeing, John Berger discusses the female nude in the tradition of European oil painting. He points out that the female nude does not appear simply as herself, but more often as an object made available to the gaze. The woman in the painting is not only looked at. Her posture, her eyes, and the way her body is presented also seem to answer to an implied viewer. And this viewer is usually male. For this reason, discussions of the nude often involve a deeper relation of looking. Who is granted the right to look? Who is positioned as the object of looking? Whose body is interpreted, displayed, and judged? And whose perspective is allowed to pass as the default? When we think about the nude in this way, the focus is no longer only the body itself, but who looks at this body and how it is presented. The emergence of women artists brought not only new artistic styles, but also new positions from which to look. When women began to depict the body, express bodily experience, and address desire, trauma, and autonomy, the body was no longer only an object to be looked at. It also became a way of articulating inner experience, lived experience, and self-consciousness. Of course, not every form of looking at the body is intrusive. When an artist looks at a life model, what is being observed is proportion, structure, bony landmarks, muscular relations, posture, center of gravity, light and shade, and line. In its ideal form, this kind of looking is professional. It seeks to suspend desire and, through aesthetic distance, to transform the body into structure, posture, and form. But the body is not merely an object placed before the gaze. It carries a person's self-consciousness, sense of shame, social judgment, and experience of identity. Whether a person can face the gaze of others with composure does not depend only on whether bodily proportions conform to aesthetic standards. It also depends on whether the environment of looking is safe, whether the viewer remains respectful, whether this act of looking is placed within a professional context, whether the person being looked at has agency, and whether that person has long been subjected to the judgment of social standards of beauty. The real complexity of looking at the body lies here. The body can be an object of study in artistic training, but it may also, within social relations, become an object of objectification and ridicule. In simple terms, the body is not unsettled by the gaze itself, but by the relation in which that gaze is placed. The eyes of the skin further reminds us that the body is the ground of our perception of the world. Seeing never belongs to the eyes alone. It is also bound up with the body's sense of space, tactile experience, and changes of posture. In this sense, the body is not only an object to be looked at, but also a subject through which seeing takes place. Yayoi Kusama's work also makes this clear. In her work, the body, desire, fear, hallucination, and repetitive visual and psychological experience are transformed into dots, nets, repeated structures, and an infinitely extending visual order. As a woman artist and an avant-garde artist, her treatment of the body, organs, and desire repeatedly challenged the social and moral limits of her time, and therefore provoked controversy. What matters, however, is that Kusama does not simply turn the body into an object to be looked at and consumed. She turns real questions of the body, ideas of desire, and the discourse of sexual liberation into artistic material. Through this, she challenges established social imaginings of the body, morality, and order, and forms a highly distinctive visual language. Works that seem to concern the body and desire ultimately do not remain at the level of sensory stimulation. They take shape as a dense, vivid, almost hallucinatory visual order. In her mirror rooms in particular, the body is no longer merely an object to be looked at. It is drawn into the play of mirrors, light, and repetitive structures, becoming an image of the self that is continually split, dispersed, and made visible again. This shows precisely that the body does not exist only as an object of looking. It can also become a source through which the artist understands the world, works through experience, and expresses the self. A deeper form of looking moves from seeing form to seeing relation, from seeing the body to seeing how the body is looked at by its age, and how it becomes a starting point for self-expression. As aesthetic experience deepens, the object is no longer merely an external presence. It begins to enter the viewer's feeling, memory, imagination, and understanding. At this point, what we face is no longer only the object first seen, but an object regenerated within experience. In a description of aesthetic psychology, Ban Xiaozheng's 3 bamboos are mentioned: the bamboo in the eye, the bamboo in the mind, and the bamboo in the hand. When bamboo enters the field of vision, its branches and leaves, posture, line, density and spacing, and movement in the wind form the initial perception. This is the bamboo in the eye. When bamboo enters more deeply into the mind, it becomes interwoven with feeling, memory, imagination, and aesthetic ideals. Gradually, forms a new image. At this moment, bamboo is no longer only bamboo in nature, but an image that has settled within the viewer's inner experience. It may appear lean, aloof, and resilient. It may also become a symbol of character, moral bearing, or a certain spiritual state. This is the bamboo in the mind. Finally, through ink and brush, line, composition, and rhythm, the image in the mind is given visible form as an artwork. It becomes the bamboo in the hand. The artist does not transfer the object unchanged into the work. Rather, between seeing, understanding, and expression, the artist seeks a new form. For this reason, artistic representation does not present reality itself, but reality reshaped by aesthetic experience. In this process, The aesthetic object is no longer only a matter of what it is, but turns towards how it is experienced and how it is expressed. Differences in aesthetic ability often become visible in this process. Some remain at the level of appearance. Some enter into form. Some see feeling. Some generate an image. Thus, artistic representation is not simply a matter of presenting the object. It allows the aesthetic object first to become an image in the mind, and then, through technique, medium, and personal style, to acquire a new form. In the previous chapters, we discussed how seeing begins, how aesthetic experience takes place, how the body enters into looking, and how image comes into being. Yet aesthetic experience does not stop at feeling itself. After we are moved by a painting, a piece of music, or a literary work, feeling does not automatically become judgment. We still need to ask, where does this feeling come from? Does it have grounds? What relation does it bear to the work? This is where aesthetic criticism begins. Aesthetic criticism helps us clarify vague intuition, turning simple likes and dislikes into judgments that can be understood, discussed, and revised. In artistic feeling and aesthetic education, Ralph Smith draws on the philosopher of art Marsha M. Eaton to distinguish between interpretation and criticism. Interpretation means explaining how a work produces meaning. Criticism, after the work has been understood, goes further by judging its value. On this basis, the book then further divides aesthetic criticism into two levels. First, exploration, then evaluation. Exploration means describing, analyzing, and understanding the work. Evaluation means putting forward a judgment after understanding the work and giving reasons for it. For instance, when facing a painting, we may first observe its composition, line, color, light and shadow, rhythm and spatial relations, before asking further. What kind of atmosphere does it create? What kind of meaning takes shape? What feeling or thought does it awaken? Only when these questions are gradually unfolded do I like it or I do not like it cease to be mere emotional reactions, and begin to carry the force of aesthetic judgment. The value of criticism does not lie in producing an authoritative interpretation for the work, but in prompting us to keep looking and keep thinking. It extends looking, deepens understanding, and makes what was once a vague feeling clearer. Every aesthetic judgment is not only an evaluation of the work, it also reveals our own way of looking. Some judgments arise from genuine feeling, some from habit and experience, some from prevailing standards, and others from limits within our horizon that we are not yet aware of. Truly valuable aesthetic criticism does not stand above others and tell them what beauty is. Rather, it offers a point of reference. It allows us to see more layers within the work and to recognize ourselves anew through the act of judgment.
Thank you for staying until the end. Aesthetic experience does not end when the act of looking is over. It continues to resonate in memory, judgment, and renewed seeing. See you next time. Be less perfect, more you.